Okay, welcome to part 2 of the What If Analysis MS Office 2013 Excel project. For part 1, we covered steps 1 through 11. In this second part, we're going to cover steps 12 through 24. So the last thing we did was we applied a custom number format to cell E21 to display number attend. Next, what we're going to do for step 12 is create a scenario named 500 attend using the number of attendees, caterer's meal cost per person, ticket price per person, and ballroom rental variables as the changing cells. And then we're going to enter values. So to locate, or to create a scenario rather, we have to open the data tab. And it's always good to save, so Control S, data tab, and then what if analysis, and then we want to go to scenario manager. As you can see, we don't have any scenarios defined. We can choose add to add scenarios. So we would like to add a scenario, and we'd like to name it 500 attend. So I'm going to type 500 attend, and then we have to indicate which cells are going to be changing. So I'm going to delete the value that was there, and the cells that we want to be the changing cells are number of attendees. So I'm going to locate that over here, and then for each changing cell we have to use a comma to separate. So just put a comma. Space isn't really necessary. Then next, caterer's meal cost per person. Right here, that's B8, comma. And then ticket price per person. That's B9. And then ballroom rental. So I think ballroom rental is down here in expenses. Click that. So as you can see, we have 4 changing cells. We leave the other values as the default values and click OK. Now we're given the opportunity to enter values. So according to the instructions, we would like to enter values. So for the first one, 500. Second one, 15.95. For the third one, 75. And for the fourth one, 12,500. And that's good. We click OK. So one scenario has been added. We have to add a few more scenarios. So for step 13, we're going to create a second scenario named 400 attend. We'll click add a scenario and then call it 400 attend. We're going to use the same changing cells, so we leave these the same, and then we leave the defaults as is for the last one, and then we click OK, and then we just have to enter new values. So we want 400 and then 1795, so I can just click there and make that 17, and then 85, and then 12.5. Good. Click OK. Next, we're going to create a third scenario. We'll add, type that in, 300 attend. Same changing cells and defaults. Click OK. We want 300 is this number, so we'll type 300, and then we want 1995, so delete that, 1995, and then 90, and then 11,995. Click OK. So now we have 500, 400, and 300 attend. We want one more, it's called 200 attend. We're going to add that. Leave the same changing cells, and then enter these values for the scenario. Okay, we'll leave this changing cells, and then click OK. And then We'll enter a value at 200, 2295, 95, and then 11995. Click OK. Okay, so the next thing we have to do after we've created the 4 scenarios is to create a summary report. So step 16 is to generate a scenario summary report using the total revenue, total expenses, and balance as the results. So right over here you can see a summary button. We click on that and it opens a scenario summary options box. We want this report type to be scenario summary. However, the results cells, these are all highlighted. We want to change that, so we can click delete because these are highlighted. We delete that and then it takes it off. This is a little tricky. What we want to do is we want to focus on total revenue. So instead of using these values in the one variable table, we want to use the total revenue over here, total income. And then we want to put a comma because we're separating the different cells. We're also going to include total expenses, comma, and balance. We click OK. So what happens is it generates this report and it creates a new worksheet. So here are the current values and the different scenarios with the different values that we entered, and then the different results for, I believe it was revenue, expenses, and balance. So let's go back to the budget tab, click save, or Control S, save it. Okay, so step 17 is the verification of the solver add-in, which we did already. Now we can move on to pretty much the last step, which is to use the solver function. So the solver function is located on the data tab in the analysis group. We click solver, and then it opens a solver parameters box. According to the instructions, we want to set the objective to calculate the highest balance possible. So if you look down here, you see balance is over here. We click that and it's cell C34. And we want to set it to calculate the highest balance, so 2 is maximum. And then we have to go to step 18. Our changing variable cells are going to be number of attendees, so we find number of attendees, and then we place a comma. And ticket price per person. So ticket price per person is here. Next, what we have to do is add constraints. To add constraints, we go over here to the right. There's a button called Add. We click on it. We can add our first constraint. Step 19 says we need to set a constraint so that the number of attendees entered in the input section of the workbook does not exceed the specified limitation in cell B12. So basically, if you look over here at the limitations, the number of attendees in the input section is 400. But the limitation, if you look in B12, is maximum attendees is 500. So we want to make it so that in calculating our maximum objective for the highest balance possible, the number of attendees will not exceed 500. Right now it's at 400, it's okay, but if it were to go up, it can't exceed 500. To do this, we want to reference a cell B4. So if you look at that B4, it's less than or equal to, and the constraint is, we click in this, B12, which is maximum attendees. Okay, that's good. We click OK, As you can see, it added the constraint here. Next, we're going to add the second constraint. This is step 20. Set constraint so that ticket price per person entered in the input section meets the requirements set in the range A14 and B15. So if you look at ticket price per person, that's a cell reference. That's B9. And then we look at the requirements in A14 to B15. Right here, A14 to B15. We basically need a minimum ticket price of 50 and a maximum ticket price of 100. So whatever this ticket price is has to be between basically 50 and 100. Now this part was a little challenging because I tried really hard to fit both of the constraints into here, but what you have to do is kind of break it up. You have to do less than or equal to one of the constraints, and then a greater than or equal to the other one. So first, let's take a look at the maximum ticket price, which is 100. So our ticket price per person has to be less than or equal to the maximum. So I already have that reference, and then B9, leave this as less than or equal to, and then the constraint would be the maximum ticket price, B15. We click OK, and so it adds the first half of that constraint for step number 20. We added another constraint, and we're going to reference the same cell, which is B9. Click on that. And instead of having less than or equal to over here, we want to click the drop-down menu, and we want to make it greater than or equal to. Because the second part of it, we want to say that whatever the ticket price per person is, it has to be greater than or equal to the lower limit, the minimum ticket price of 50. So that constraint, we just click in this box, and you notice how it added a plus? That will cause an error. You don't want the plus in there. I'm not sure why it does that, but it confused me for the longest time. I was wondering why I got it wrong. So we delete the plus, and it should be just this is greater than or equal to B14, which is the minimum ticket price. We click OK, and we can verify that we have that there. We have B9 is less than or equal to B15, and B9 is greater than or equal to B14. So it puts it right in that range. We have to add another constraint, and this one's going to refer to setting an appropriate integer constraint. Now, if you look at the two values that we're looking at, I believe it's the number of attendees and the ticket price per person. What we want when we set an appropriate integer constraint, an integer is basically a whole number, and so we want to reference B4 because number of attendees has to be a whole number. It can't be a fraction. And then we want to set an integer constraint, so we click the drop-down menu in the middle, and then we select integer, and that constrains this reference to only integers. It can't be fractions. We click OK, and it adds it right there. The last constraint we have to add will ensure that the valet parking expense is less than or equal to the product of the maximum parking stalls and valet parking per vehicle. So if we scroll down here, we look at valet parking expense. Right now it's at 3,990. So we basically, in calculating this objective, we want to set a constraint so that this expense value is less than or equal to the product of the maximum parking stalls. So their maximum number of parking stalls is 240, and valet parking per vehicle is 1995. So when you multiply this and this, you get a value, and that value must be the limit. And so whatever expense we have has to be less than or equal to that limit. So let's just click Add to add our last constraint. The cell reference that we want to reference is B26, which is right here, valet parking, and we want to make it less than or equal to, and the constraint would be B13 here, and then what we can do is multiply and then B7. Which is the valet parking per car. We click OK, and now we have all of our constraints. Basically, we're on our last step before we have to submit it. Step 23. We have to solve the problem. So we've got the objective set to a maximum. We know which variable cells we're changing, and we set the constraints. I think we leave all the other things default, but we go to solve. So there's a button here, we click solve, and it says solver found a solution. If it doesn't say this, you may have to go back and check your constraints. Often it's just a something that was mistyped, like that plus sign or something, but it should be okay. What you want to do are two things on this page though. You want to keep the original values in the budget worksheet. So as you can see here, it says keep solver solution. If you were to do this, then whatever the solver came up with, it would leave it on your existing worksheet. But the instructions say we want to keep the original values on the budget worksheet. So by clicking restore original values, it restores the original values in the adjustable cells. So it'll generate a report, and it'll restore the original values which you want for the budget worksheet. So in addition to clicking that button, we have to generate an answer report. If you look on your right, reports show answer. So we click answer, and then OK. Now, if you're missing the reports, then it could be problematic. It could be that your solver add-in wasn't installed correctly. You may want to try restarting the system, or if you're not working on a personal computer, or if you're working on a Mac, you may want to try it in the PC version. But basically, you have to make sure that you click reports and answer. So that's good. You click OK. And it generated an answer report. So this is your answer report. Now what we have to do is ensure the worksheets are correctly named and placed in the following order. Scenario summary, good. Answer report 1, and budget. Save the workbook. Control S, save. Close the workbook and then exit Excel. Submit the workbook as directed. So I'm going to go ahead and close this because I've saved it, and then submit it to my IT lab, as you've done for the other projects. Okay, thank you very much. And you should be successful. If you have any questions, please bring them up during the lab and we should be able to figure them out. Thank you.